Welcome to the Cyber 24 podcast, the weekly pod dedicated to helping business and governmental leaders better understand the often intimidating topic of cybersecurity so you can make better decisions for your organization. My name is Marty Carpenter of 24/9. I work in strategic communications, public affairs, and government relations. I'm joined today by our expert cybersecurity panelist of one, panelist, Anthony Boise from Sophos. How you doing, Anthony?
G'day, Marty. I am doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much. Always good to have you on the show. Hey, our topic and top story this week, a mind-boggling ransom paid by one of the largest producers of food, or meat in this case, in the entire world after they got hacked just about a week ago. Plus, I want to talk a little bit about the FBI's recommendation to pay ransom or don't pay ransom, but either way to be in touch with them. We'll get to that a little bit later on in the show. But first, let's start with JBS Meat, this company that's the Brazilian-based company, largest meat producer in the world, got hit by ransomware. We talked about this on the show a little bit last week with Matt Sorensen, but news out this morning that JBS got itself back online and everybody back at work, workers back in the plants, and meat being packaged and produced. And it seems like they must have done that pretty quickly because they opted to pay an $11 million ransom, which they paid in Bitcoin. So I guess I would start by just saying this. I don't recall a ransom that we've talked about in an actual dollar amount so far that was quite that high. So either I'm misremembering, Anthony, or that really is just a mind-boggling figure that they paid out at $11 million.
No, you're right. I mean, this is a very, very high number. And, we have seen over we being Sophos, we have seen over the last year, specifically actually even over the pandemic, and we put this out in one of our threat reports that we do each year. We do a ransomware report as well as a threat report, and we have seen ransoms increase 3 to 4 fold. So they are continually increasing, but I'm talking about going from like the tens of thousands into the early couple of hundreds of thousands. Now, that's not the total cost of recovering from a ransomware event, right? With backups and recovery and downtime, people time, and all that kind of good gear. That's just the ransom itself. And in this case, it appears that the 11 million is for the ransom.
Mm-hmm. I did read somewhere, and I couldn't get enough information on this, so I may be going a little off of the factual narrative here. But go with me on this. I read that, or it seems it's in my mind from somewhere, that they paid this $11 million after they already had their systems back up and running. So the only explanation I can think for that is that they had some backups, they could get back up online, but they didn't want to wait to do that until they had necessarily plugged the holes, so they went ahead and paid it, knowing that they may not be totally back in safe position. Is there any other reason that they would have paid the money even after they were already back up and running?
Yeah, I mean, there could be a couple of reasons. So one of the things that you just touched on then, and so a couple of thoughts that go through my mind is either we could be having a case of that they were only able to get partial amounts of data, kind of like you're sort of alluding to as well. It could be a case of that, hey, we don't want you to hit us again. One of the challenges with any type of event, any type of compromise, is that there may still be a foot in the door. There may be still some kind of toehold or a repeat attack that happens after the fact, which is one of the reasons why Sophos and other organizations, other companies, cybersecurity companies offer rapid response type services or managed threat response, managed detection response, so that they can continue to monitor the environment after the fact and looking for those types of things. So I mean, there could be a couple of different reasons here, but that was kind of one of my first thoughts is I wonder if this is payment for the data that they couldn't recover themselves, and then potentially maybe there was some kind of level of agreement saying, hey, don't come back.
Yeah. That seems like a big leap of faith to take if it is the latter there, though, to say like, well, here's the money. Please don't steal from us again. Boy, how do you put yourself in a position to trust someone who just extorted you for $11 million?
Well, one of the things there is that there still is an honor code, which is, I've mentioned this in the past about how kind of bizarre that there is an honor code, but there also has to be one for the industry to stay alive. And I'm talking about now the ransomware industry, the malicious actors. For that to still be a thriving business, they still have to produce some level of performance. And I'm not just talking about performing by ransoming, but I'm also talking about performance in the sense of giving back data for instance, there's a group, DarkSide. They're the ones that took down the pipeline. And short version there is part of their sort of public statement and their mission statement, if you will, is that we will not attack or go after critical infrastructure type services. They're not going to go after healthcare. They're not going to go after, and so on. And they've got a statement out there what they're not going to go after. But yet, what they can't control is the people actually carrying out the attack, because they're not necessarily the group that potentially is carrying out the attack. So the people carrying out the attack, they don't really have a good reign on them. And they're going after whatever they're going after and taking down whoever they take down. But the part of their mission statement, if you will, is they were saying that they're not going to go after these industries because they're in business to make money. They're not in business to, I don't know, cause trouble. Wait a second.
People, right? Like cause death.
Yeah, sure. They're in business to make money. And so therefore, they want to get paid. So by doing that, they're going to ransom your stuff. They're going to get paid. They're going to move on. Because if they don't give back your data, then you can very quickly, nobody pays.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's also important, I mentioned right off the top of the show that $11 million seems like a high amount to pay. I don't know how that necessarily fits in relative to the revenue for JBS and how much does it cost them every day to be offline. I'm sure there was a mathematical calculation in deciding to pay the ransom. I just think thinking through this situation from a business perspective, that's a dollars and cents decision. The one that would be harder to justify is if you are taking a risk by saying, look, we're trusting them to some extent not to come back and hit us again. That one, if it blows up on you, is the kind of thing that tends to get chief executives fired. So I think that's one I'd want to be a little bit careful about. This all comes just a couple days after we learned the FBI was able to actually recoup $2.3 million of the $4.4 million ransom paid by the Colonial Pipeline, which I thought was really interesting. And we talked about it a bit last week, that how surprising it is that they could get that money back. Maybe a different point to bring up on this, though, is that, and this was pointed out by the journalists at the Wall Street Journal, that this attack shows that hackers have shifted from targeting data-rich companies like retailers, banks, and insurers to essential service providers like hospitals, transport operators, and food companies. I mean, if you look at the pattern there, you say food supply. We had the energy secretary come out and say that the energy grid is susceptible. We've had fuel supply interrupted. Things that actually do make things go up in cost and have a relatively immediate ripple effect for most of the public. So it's interesting. You mentioned that there's sort of this honor among thieves, and they're not shutting down hospitals, their ability to actually, treat people or whatever. But this does feel like they're expanding and maybe pushing up against those limitations that they'd publicly proclaimed beforehand.
Yeah, for sure. So, there's obviously different groups and so on. And again, people who are carrying out the acts, right? It may not necessarily be the prime focus or primary focus of the individuals that are creating the attacks and sort of creating the material and creating the methods, but those that now go, the minions that go out and go and carry out the work, they themselves may not necessarily follow the same level of consideration for that business model. Yeah. Now we have seen just as an example in our healthcare cyber threat or state of ransomware for healthcare in 2021. We've actually noted, we performed a survey of 328 healthcare IT managers of mid-sized organizations across 30 different countries across the globe. And we actually had seen just over a third, so about 34% of these healthcare organizations that were hit with ransomware last year, which is actually just a little bit lower, of 37% across multiple different sectors across the globe. So it was a little bit lower. That said, we've got some pretty interesting statistics out of that, and about, as I mentioned, I think it was about paying the ransom only got, for instance, 69% of the data back, and there's just some interesting statistics in there as it relates to what these folks are doing, the malicious actors, what you're going to do when you're placed into that same kind of position. If you are, hopefully you're not, but it's worth a read nonetheless.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, time to take a break, but first a reminder, the Cyber 24 podcast is presented each week by our friends at Valcom. Valcom is a Utah-based IT solutions and services provider with a drive for getting IT right, from ironclad security to computing and beyond. Valcom's 35-plus years means they have the experience and the expertise to help your business from desktop to the data center. Check them out at vlcm.com. Back with more on the Cyber 24 podcast presented by Valcom right after this. You've seen the headlines. Every 39 seconds, there's a new attempted cyber attack in the U.S. As the threat landscape becomes more complex, the need for security operations is greater than ever before. It's time to put experts in your corner. For something as important as your organization's security, having a named engineer and analyst paired with you is critical. Arctic Wolf is a leader in security operations, utilizing a cloud-native security analytics platform to deliver security operations as a concierge service. Arctic Wolf's Security Operations Center as a Service is always on guard, with security experts monitoring your environments 24/7. Don't become the next headline. Learn more about Arctic Wolf's redefined cybersecurity approach at vlcmtech.com/ArcticWolf. That's vlcmtech.com/Arctic-Wolf. With the increasing number of employees working remotely everywhere around the world, businesses are now looking at supporting a mostly, if not full, remote workforce. But just because security at the office is no longer a high priority, that doesn't mean that remote security should be overlooked or be difficult to manage. To enable remote work security at your business, Valcom recommends WatchGuard Automation Core. WatchGuard's automation security platform speeds up processes, kills threats, and empowers IT teams to do more with less. With WatchGuard, you can apply zero-trust principles across networks and applications and help remote employees enable secure Wi-Fi networks. To learn more about remote work security, visit vlcmtech.com/WatchGuard. That's vlcmtech.com/WatchGuard. Welcome back to the Cyber 24 podcast presented by Valcom. We continue our discussion with Anthony Boise from Sophos. And Anthony, I thought this was interesting. The FBI has, maybe not officially, but a person of sufficient rank at the FBI talked to the Wall Street Journal, and essentially in the discussion came out and said, we don't want companies to pay ransom when they're hit with ransomware, but if you do, we still want to know about it. Or in other words, at least as I interpret it, we don't want you to pay ransom, but we know that not everyone's going to listen to us. And when you do pay ransom, we'd rather still work with you on it and understand about what happened with your attack than have you just not report it at all. And I wonder what your take is on that. It seems like businesses are put in an impossible position when the federal government says don't pay the ransom, because a business really only cares, and to a certain extent has a legal obligation to shareholders and so on, to go and make the best financial decision for the company. So if it's not explicitly illegal to pay the ransom, they're likely to go do that because that's the quickest route to get back to making money, as opposed to letting the FBI kind of drag it out. I just wonder what your general thoughts are on all that, this impossible position that businesses find themselves in when they're hit with ransomware.
Yeah, it really is tough, and you won't hear from me do or don't. It's absolutely an individual or an organization's decision. There's businesses out there that exist in helping you to navigate through that process, helping you to be able to negotiate through that process, to negotiate a lower ransom, You've got cyber security insurance. And matter of fact, there's actually some cyber security insurance that it's saying that they may not pay out on ransomware events and things like that. So it really is a hairy situation. And I do know actually firsthand that the FBI, they do want to hear about it. I've had some success, admittedly, working with the FBI through one of our partners. We have had a customer that was, there was a customer that they had that was hit, and short version is reached out to the FBI. There was able to be some data sharing, like an encrypted file sent to the FBI, and then the FBI were able to run a couple of different decryption keys that they had, and something similar that they've seen, whether it's the file extension or the type of encryption used, and they were able to provide the key and therefore prevent the need for paying the ransom. And so, but then at the same token, I've been involved in another phone call and conversation where unfortunately that was not the case, and the FBI hadn't seen this before and so on, but yet being able to work with them and get them the information, and again, whether you paid it or not, the ransom that is, being able to get them some encrypted files, to be able to get them as much intel as they can possibly have, definitely aids them in being able to help out sort of from a greater good perspective.
Yeah, this is a problem that continues to grow, and in fact, I think that the trends show that it's going to continue to get worse, certainly before it gets better. In fact, CNBC had a piece out this week where experts had essentially said that they've warned we have not seen the worst of the ransomware attacks. And they cited a couple of interesting statistics. One of them's always got to do with the dollars and cents, right? That cyber attack victims paid out about $350 million worth of cryptocurrency in 2020, a 311% increase compared with the previous year, and that ransomware has now grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry with roughly 85% of America's critical infrastructure privately owned. They say the private sector is not required to follow the same strict cybersecurity guidelines set by the government, and that actually makes the private sector a prime target for hackers. So, I would never pose the question to you, geez, how do we solve this? Can you go solve this problem that nobody else seems to solve, Anthony? But I would say that it appears from all the trends that it's going to get worse. And if you wipe away all the statistics and say the only one you really need to see is that there are successful attacks on targets that have deep pockets and they are paying out. That's sort of what we've talked about through the show so far. And as long as that is the pattern, there's no incentive for cyber criminals to stop what they're doing.
It's so true. It's a supply and demand thing. It's they're going to go where the money's at, and there is a lot of money. And it is the tough thing is trying to tell these organizations not to pay their ransom, yet they're not the ones being ransomed. Right? It's such an impossible battle. So this is where the call goes out. The call goes out to all those listening. We have gone through in some previous pods a response plan. We have gone through certain things that organizations should look for, should implement, should do to help lower the chances of an attack. There is nothing out there bulletproof, and we've said this in the past. But there are things that are known to lower the chances of being hit, and hopefully avoid. Prevention is always better than the cure, because at the end of the day, to your point, Marty, the ransomware threat actors, they're going to continue to innovate. Their technology is going to get better. They're going to continue to be relentless in their efforts to chase the dollar. And while we continue to pay, they're going to continue to have success and continue to thrive. They're going to continue to grow. And these groups, they've moved from just ransoming. They have also moved into to data theft, right? So they're continually evolving and changing their approach so that even if you say, we've got backups, we're not paying, they go, well, we're going to release your personal and private data out to the web. And now they're holding you hostage again. And so in a roundabout way, they're relentless.
Yeah. Well, you can see where the trend line's going, but you can also understand that for businesses, this ultimately, there will be a point of awareness, right? Every time there is an event like this that catches some headlines, more business leaders understand that this is a threat that they have to take seriously with their business. And it doesn't take a real genius to look and say, hey, the risk is maybe spending $11 million, for example, on a ransom. And what if we take, instead of that, and knowing that's a threat and we've got our cyber insurance and all that in place, what if we take $2 million and put it and increase security spending by $2 million? Then it would take you 5 years after you've gone, almost 6 years by the time you'd gone through that kind of burn rate, to where you would have spent essentially the equivalent on ransom. So at this point, I think there's still some businesses that probably look at it and say, we're going to do the best we can on the budget that we feel is appropriate, and we're going to sort of hope that we're not the ones who get hit for that big of a dollar, because the dollars and cents work out. But there will come a point, perhaps, at least according to the trend line we're seeing, where that tips in the different direction, and people say, hey, for my business, I gotta put the money into being bulletproof as I can be, and protecting myself.
Yeah, it's the difference between, or I should actually say, the challenge is myself working for a cybersecurity company, and I come in and I have a discussion with an organization, or I speak on the pod, right, and reach the listening ears. It's one thing hearing from me that this is a possibility, and you want to avoid this at all costs. At which point, there's no real association. There's no real kind of like, well, what does that actually mean? And it's not going to happen to me, and so on. It's very different hearing it from their peers, aka another organization from the industry, and seeing these real dollar amounts actually being thrown down. Again, it's one thing me saying, hey, the ransomware payments have gone up to $250,000 and on average. And then there's another thing where JBS comes out and they paid $11 million, right? So don't get me wrong, I'm not at all even remotely happy or pleased that this is happening. The thing that it does, like you said, is it brings awareness. I'm grateful for the awareness, so that organizations can start taking some of those steps like you identified, and therefore hopefully become closer to being bulletproof and avoid such a pain.
Yeah. Great insight as always, Anthony. We appreciate you taking some time to share your perspective and help us understand what's going on behind some of these headlines.
Thank you very much for having me, as always. It's great to be on the pod.
As we wrap up for this episode, I want to thank our sponsors at Valcom. At Valcom, you get much more than a dedicated IT retailer. They become an extension of your IT team. Whether you're a startup or an enterprise, Valcom has the technical, sales, and engineering expertise to make your business more effective and more productive. Check them out at vlcm.com. That's vlcm.com. Special thanks as well to our supporting partners, the Utah Department of Technology Services, the Kim C. Gardner Policy Institute, our friends at Secuvant, the Utah Attorney General's Office, and the Utah Department of Public Safety. You can follow us on Twitter at cyber24_, or you can follow us on Facebook as well. Hit us up in either place to let us know what you think, or if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, you can also rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Thanks, everyone, and stay safe online.